Story 1. Modern Family when Phil goes down to visit his dad in Florida because he thinks his dad isn't okay. The entire episode he has a great day with him, and it cuts to Phil in the future saying, "I'm so glad I had the best day with my dad. But what I didn't realize is that it would be my last." And it cuts to his dad's funeral. Story 2. The Scrubs episode where Dr. Cox keeps seeing Jordan's brother everywhere. Then right at the end he realizes that they are at his funeral. Not much media makes me cry, but this definitely had me in bits. Easily the saddest episode ever. Story 3. Criminal Minds where Foyt kills Haley, so Hotch snaps and beats him to death. Actually, early seasons of Criminal Minds have a few that belong on this list. Story 4. There are many that have made me cry. Some have been mentioned already. One that hasn't is the very final Blackadder episode. Season 4, Episode 6. When they go over the top, it is heartbreaking, especially as Blackadder is so funny and is a comedy show. The emotion of that final scene seems heavier. Story 5. Buffy. Once more with feeling. While yes, it is the musical episode, it's also such a poignant rendering of how it feels to be suicidal and depressed and so full of despair that you feel completely empty. That, plus Spike's life is just living, shows the side of a depressed person's loved ones desperately trying to save them. Every time I feel utterly miserable, I watch this episode, and it makes me cry. It's so cathartic and so heartbreaking at the same time. Story 6. Rizzoli and Isles after Lee Thompson Young's suicide. The director said they would only film one version of the scene because it was so sad for all of them. Those actors are legitimately devastated. It wasn't acting. Absolutely heart-wrenching. Story 7. Futurama. Jurassic Park. That ending where Seymour, in reality, was waiting the whole time for him until he died. Gets me every time. I cry my eyes out every time I watch that episode. Story 8. Doctor Who, the Doomsday episodes, Rose Tyler's season end. Them standing on opposite sides of the universe wall gets me every time. And then later, with the Metacrisis 10th Doctor on the beach. Story 9. The last episode of M*A*S*H. When Hawkeye is talking to his psychologist about something that happened in the war that he can't move past, and he doesn't know why. After talking about it, he realizes why he can't move past it. I won't ruin it. Watch the episode, even if you've never seen a single other episode. It's masterful television. Story 10. The series finale of The Wonder Years. The father dies a few years later. Winnie and Kevin never marry. It's also the music that tugs at the heartstrings. Story 11. Having asked my children this question since they watch a lot of television with me, their answer is Bluey, The Sign, which I agree, I always tear up at the end. Story 12. Torchwood, the finale of Children of Earth. Seeing Peter Capaldi's character get devastated after everything he did to help the situation, then him killing his own family, that scene is awful to watch. Story 13. The Golden Girls, Old Friends. Sophia meets a man at the boardwalk named Alvin and they become friends, but Alvin is revealed to be suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Do you think he'll remember me? I don't know, Ma. I'll remember him. Story 14. Dan dying in Lucifer. His daughter tearfully begging Lucifer to tell her that her dad is not dead because he never lies to her. That made me tear up. Story 15. Dinosaurs. It's not just sad. It's absolutely horrific, made even worse by the fact that this light-hearted family comedy had the darkest turn of any family show in history, as black clouds emanating from volcanoes blocked out the sun and brought the dawn of the Ice Age. The family we had laughed along with for 4 years sat in their house as the snow started to fall, waiting to die. Technically, it's not the final episode in terms of running order, but it is to all intents and purposes. I think American Broadcasting Company just couldn't bear to inflict the horror of the episode on the worldwide audience as a finale. That said, brave writing and a brave decision by the network to greenlight it. As a planet 30 years after it aired, we don't appear to have heeded all the warnings of its message. Although big strides have been made, some countries such as China and India, who are the worst polluters, seem to just carry on regardless. Perhaps their governments should be made to sit and watch dinosaurs. Story 16. BJ Honeycutt leaves a Christmas party, and desperately tries to keep a doomed soldier alive until midnight so his children will not spend the rest of their lives thinking of Christmas as the day their daddy died. Story 17. Dr. House? Wilson's heart is brutal, but also the episode where they find that one of the interns has shot himself. It's incredibly sudden, and they portray perfectly how depression isn't easily shown with his death. They even have a conversation about suicide earlier in the season very casually. That reveal really hurt. Story 18. I'm racking my brain to pick an episode or even just one scene from Ted Lasso as the saddest, but I can't. Beard forgiving Nate. Roy explaining why McAdoo beating up the fan is none of their business. Rebecca confessing to Ted. Ted telling how he found his dad. Roy hugging Jamie. Nate playing the violin and having that talk with his dad. Sam's dad walking in on him raging. Lots of scenes and episodes. God, I missed that show. Story 19. Criminal Minds when Hotchner kills Foyt. Their rivalry has been building up, and Hotchner kills Foyt but loses his ex-wife. He is someone who doesn't even flinch at anything, but he's so shaken up. Supernatural. This was heartbreaking on so many levels, so many times. When Sam dies for the first time and Dean's breakdown immediately afterwards, and when Bobby confronts him about making a deal with the demon. Post-Hell Dean, the way he's broken up about the torture, the way he's desperate to save people. Story 20. The Sopranos' long-term parking. Adriana tells the Federal Bureau of Investigation about the murder in her club while choking back tears, then finally tells Christopher about being an informant. Christopher's first reaction is absolute shock, and as she goes on, his face turns to rage, and he nearly chokes her to death while screaming, "How could you do this to us? I loved you." Then stopping and breaking down while Adriana regains her breath and then comforts him because this is so normalized in their relationship. He seems to be open to the idea of going into witness protection with Adriana and leaves the apartment, only to later see a destitute family at a gas station, a possible glimpse into his future if he leaves the cushy mob lifestyle, as well as the reminder that Adriana is infertile. Adriana is packing her things after telling the Federal Bureau of Investigation that she and Chris will come in later when she gets a call from Tony, who tells her that Chris has been hospitalized after an attempt to kill himself. Silvio will pick her up and take her to the hospital. We then see Adriana driving with her suitcase and finally leaving, only for it to cut to Adriana in the car with Silvio, who keeps telling her that Chris is tough and will be fine. She tears up as she seems to be understanding what he actually means as they go further away. He drives into the woods, and it's finally confirmed to her that she's done. She tries to escape, but he drags her from the car, and we last see her crawling on her hands and knees trying to get away. Silvio points his gun, and it's only after they're both off-screen that we hear the shots fired. Chris packs up Adriana's belongings and throws her suitcase out while also putting her car in long-term parking at the airport. Story 21. Avatar. The Last Airbender. The Tales of Ba Sing Se Season 2 Episode 15. This episode gets me every time I see it. Story 22. Old Guy Here. Hill Street Blues when the actor playing the captain died in real life, and they had to have his character die as well. The episode where the new captain gives the final morning instructions before all the police officers head out, and he says the old captain's standard greeting, "Let's be careful out there." Wouldn't you know it, I found the clip. Botch some of the details, but still chokes me up. Story 23. The body Buffy the Vampire Slayer. After returning home at the end of the previous episode to find her mother dead, Buffy Summers must deal with the horrifying aftermath of Joyce's sudden death. Course Oblivion Star Trek Voyager, the Voyager crew invent an enhanced warp drive to get them home faster, but unknown to them, they are not really the Voyager crew. They are duplicates, and the new engine starts to break them and the ship down at the molecular level. The visitor Star Trek Deep Space Nine, set decades after the events of the show. An old Jake Sisko tells an unexpected visitor to his home why he abandoned his writing career after the death of his father at age 18. Election Day, Part 2. The West Wing. Annabeth finds Leo dead in his hotel room. Stay, How to Get Away with Murder. Annalise Keating is dead, and most of the old gang gather at her funeral. Afterwards, Christopher starts the new academic year at Middleton Law School, telling his students that this is Criminal Law 101, or, as my mentor liked to call it, How to Get Away with Murder. Papa's got a brand new excuse. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air will finally starts to deal with the trauma of his utterly useless dad. Dear Mrs. Kennedy, the Crown Elizabeth deals with her own insecurities while the most glamorous couple in the world visit her. Months later, when President Kennedy is murdered, she must write to Jackie Kennedy. The contents of the letter we do not see. In Excelsis Deo, The West Wing, Charlie observes that Mrs. Landingham is a bit down and quizzes her on what is wrong. She tells him the story of how her two sons were killed in the Vietnam War. Posse Comitatus, The West Wing, Simon Donovan is murdered in a grocery store trying to buy a flower for CJ, having just told her she no longer needs Secret Service protection and implying they are now free to pursue their attraction to each other. Story 24. I just watched the King of Queens two-part episode where Carrie has the miscarriage. It is so beautifully written for such a weirdly funny show. I genuinely love it. Story 25. Sometimes you hear the bullet, M*A*S*H. Hawkeye's childhood friend dies on the operating table after being wounded. For the first time in the show, Hawkeye completely breaks down. Henry comes and tells him, there are certain rules about a war. Rule number 1 is young men die, and rule number 2 is doctors can't change rule number 1. Story 26. Band of Brothers is a 10-episode miniseries. It was episode 9, Why We Fight, the episode where they find the concentration camp. The Americans that found the camp didn't know what it was at first and were horrified not only by the condition of the people they found but by the negative and negligent actions of those who lived nearby. They screamed at shop owners that there was no way they didn't know what was happening just up the road and suggested that the smell alone should have caught their attention. Later in the episode, the American Army orders all able-bodied persons from the town to start burying the dead. As somewhat satisfying as it is to see the townspeople being forced to face the atrocities they thrived on, it's still horrifying to see how many people were persecuted, tortured, starved, and ultimately killed for their religious beliefs. Near the end of the episode, it is stated that, unfortunately, the living persons rescued from the camp would need to stay there until they could receive medical care and be healthy enough to move. The American soldiers would also need to stop feeding them, or else their stomachs may explode from how long they were starving. You can see them wailing as they are ordered and pushed back inside. You see anguish on the faces of soldiers pushing them back in. The whole show is dark and tragic as it depicts the actions of Easy Company throughout Europe in World War II. But that particular episode was a huge gut punch. Story 27. Firefly, The Message. Just finished rewatching, and the look Nathan Fillion gives the camera before it fades to black, knowing the show was already canceled. Story 28. Young Sheldon, when his dad dies and he keeps replaying the last moments with his dad, imagining different scenarios for what he could have done differently. Story 29. The Walking Dead Killer Within. It's been memed to death, but Andrew Lincoln's performance of portraying how a father and husband responds to the birth of his daughter, the death of his wife, and the fact his young son had to shoot his mom, contextual to the background of the world burning, was perfect. Story 30. As a kid, the last episode of David the Gnome and how he has to say goodbye to his wife and how his pet fox was so devastatingly lost without him is heart-wrenching for an adult to watch, let alone a young child. Story 31. The Body, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. We binge-watch Buffy regularly in my house, and we always have to discuss if we're going to watch The Body and if we are, when, because you don't watch that episode and then go to work or school or really just go out in public at all. Story 32. The episode Bill Moves On from the old sitcom News Radio deals with the death of the character Bill, who was played by the recently murdered Phil Hartman. At one point, the characters are reading a goodbye letter from Bill, and the cast is sobbing real tears because they are obviously thinking about and missing Phil. I am dead. Do not get on a plane and fly around searching for me. Also, I had stopped watching Glee regularly by this point, but man, the quarterback after Finn and Corey's death absolutely gutted me. I had not cried that much watching a TV show in a long time. Story 33. The finale to Band of Brothers. The last scenes especially are a solid 5 minutes of sobbing every time, going through each member of Easy Company and explaining what happened to them after the war. The reveals of each of the old veterans with the names after. And then Major Winter's final lines, My grandson asked me, "Were you a hero during the war, Grandpa?" I said, No, I wasn't. But I fought in a company of heroes. Story 34. The episode of Doctor Who when Rose goes back to meet her dad for the first time. This is one of the rare instances where knowing the outcome actually makes it harder to watch. Eccleston wasn't my favorite Doctor, but his acting is phenomenal in this episode. Every time he notices the car that is stuck in the loop, you can see it in his face. He knows what is wrong and what needs to happen, but he cannot bring himself to tell Rose. It does such a good job of bringing a sense of dread to the whole episode. Then the ending, oh man, the ending. Story 35. The episode of the Golden Girls where they spend the night in the homeless shelter because Sophia accidentally donated a coat that had a winning lottery ticket in the pocket. I saw this episode when I was a kid, and it was the exact moment that I decided I would be a social worker when I grew up. And I did, and I spent 5 years total working specifically in homeless shelters.